evening. I feel very much like an imposter here. I look at the notes beside me and I realize that these are things that one has to do properly, and I'm very happy that I could just put some notes together, and I thought I would share them with you just as very random thoughts. I'm not a writer, I don't think like a writer, and I don't have the vocabulary of a writer. But bear with me. I am an author, and I am an author who writes with images, I would like to think. And in spite of your wonderfully generous introduction, I would like to introduce myself as slightly differently. I think I have learned focus at the Zakir Hussain Academy and editing at the Undache School, because Undache is, of course, the master of editing, and Zakir for all that he taught me about focus. So when young photographers come to ask me how to be a photographer, I ask them to do an MA in literature and then come to photography for two reasons. Because there's no point I think you need to have quite a substantial life experience within you to be able to bring something more to the image. Otherwise, you're just like a photocopy machine that can photograph whatever comes in front of it. So I suggest they do an MA in literature to gather life experience, but also to understand form, to see how Calvino would make form for the material that he had to work with. A style that the no-style Jeff Dyer continues as well. So if he gets interested in photography, and he will write the history of photography, but through the themes in photography. Or he gets interested in Lawrence and he writes out of sheer rage because he's unable to actually write that book about Lawrence. And I think there's a lot, the most for photography to really, once I see this hall full of photographers that have come to listen to the writers, then I know things will start moving in photography. So my reading list for the starting photographers who are here might be interested. The very first book that I give to any artist is Rilke's Letters to a Young Poet, followed by Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own, followed by Tanizaki's In Praise of Shadows, and most significantly, Vikram Seth's All You Who Sleep Tonight. My favorite book of photography is Sebald's Austerlitz. I think he is the one who really understood the connection between image and text that Sunil Kilnani spoke about in Delhi at another Lit Fest, and talked about the tension between image and text and how sometimes the image can do the work for you, and when it's terrible, when the combination is really bad, is when one is trying to illustrate the other. I'm just giving you these random points that I will pull together in another 2 minutes. So this was that you had to study literature, and then you could come to photography, and you might have the possibility of bringing something else, both in the content but also in the form with which you would make your books, or whatever form you saw. But a year ago, I discovered Instagram. And I discovered the world of images and the archives of images that were being created by everybody. You don't really know on Instagram who's a photographer, who is not. And before I read any news, I look at the Instagram feed, because like everybody else, I'm hooked to this world of the image, and I'm getting my world history, whatever's happened in the world in the previous 24 hours or 12 hours, through Instagram. And I keep telling all my writer, artist friends that, how can you not be on Instagram? Give me your phone, I'm going to download it for you right now. I asked Ram Guha that question, but he doesn't have a smartphone. There was nothing to download. But I do start to think that even though the reading of photography is quite culturally specific, and don't jump down my throat when I say that I do think that the image is once again the mother of all languages. It's the language that, I don't need to understand Tamil or Russian or French or Japanese to get a sense of what someone is posting from those places. I read them, of course, with the specificity of my culture, but it is still, I shy away from calling it a universal language, but I like to call it the mother of all languages. And it's beyond region, of course, but also beyond literacy. And I think there we are going to see some very interesting forms develop. And I wonder what a poet who is illiterate will do and make photo poetry, perhaps. I also wonder, when Vikram Seth decides to take on the camera, what kind of poetry he will write. And so there might be completely new forms, and we don't know what the novel of the future is going to be, because we don't know how writers of the future are going to engage with the image. It's quite clear to me that they will have to, but what forms that will take, I don't know. But imagine if there was an Oxford Dictionary of Images that people that were perhaps not literate could also access in some form. So I keep wondering about how writer friends will take on Instagram. What will happen when Ram Guha actually starts to post images from places that he's researching in? And obviously, the intention is going to be so different from trying to be a good photographer, which is a pitfall. I think that's when we start to see photography take on completely different forms than we have known so far. I urge you all to look at Teju Kole's essay on the Instagram today in the New York Times, and I'm quoting the last paragraph. Once we've fallen in love with an artist's work, isn't one of the things we most long for to get inside the artist's head, to somehow get closer to the creative process? This is why we read interviews, it is why we look at sketchbooks, it is why we pore over contact sheets. Instagram, at its best, can replicate aspects of this directness. It can be a conversation that unfolds gradually over weeks, months. We see how an obsession develops and not simply what it looks like once it is on the walls of a museum or between the pages of a book. One part of the thrill is knowing that it is not happening anywhere else with such intimacy or immediacy. Another is the bittersweet fact of its evanescence. Like all conversation, it happens when it happens, and when it's gone, it's gone. So that's the ephemeral world of Instagram. But it brings me back to the idea of the P-book, which apparently the kind of books I make now and some of you make are called. So there's the e-book and there's the physical book. I also imagine, along with the book, that somehow I've always been uncomfortable with the idea of prints on the wall. So now I found a way that I can actually have an exhibition with my books on the wall, and I make book objects because I want to frame the book. It's still a functional book, but it also goes onto the wall. It also allows for, I imagine in the future, while there is all these e-books and a digital, I don't know how many different forms will come, that the book more and more becomes more and more valuable. It becomes more and more an object. It's something that you want to possess. And I want you to have that book on the walls of your house, alongside your miniature paintings and photographs. My photographs are now in mobile museums and they're no longer on walls. The walls have the books. So I'm just very anxious to see if I could go forward even 2 years to see how the writers sitting in this audience are going to take on the image and what is going to happen in that interaction, in that overlap. And when they bring their own voice, their own writerly voice to the making of the image, rather than trying to be a good photographer, we will get some completely different form. Because anyway, I think photography is at its best when it says the unsayable, when it says what doesn't have words, what doesn't have vocabulary. So I'm very curious to say what will happen when the masters of vocabulary, the writers, who have all the words and all the forms and all the well, they have it all at their disposal. I'm very curious to see how they will take on the image. Thank you very much.